Oh yeah, it just told me. Yeah.
Well, hello everybody. This is the sound. This is the self. Well, okay, I'm going to stop that.
We do it again.
Um, yeah, we can just start over. I'm not going to stop it. Stop it. Okay, let's just start as if we're just starting. I'm
Okay.
like in two different businesses in my head. Okay. Hello everybody. This is the Self Worth Talks, and I am Suzanne McCall, and I do these talks with really inspirational women who have taken their own stories and done their own work and gone on to have careers that really help people to kind of progress in their way with the same things that my guests have gone through. So it's all about self-worth and finding your worth. And today I'm really excited to have my colleague, Leslie Palumbo. It's so nice to have you here.
Oh, it's so nice to be here, Suzanne.
Leslie is I'm going to read a little bit about her credentials because she's very successful and trained here. Grief counselor, a coach, a speaker, an author, a Reiki master, and she works with people who have lost people who are that they love, and it helps them to find joy and meaning, I think, in the grief process, which is so counterintuitive, like to find joy in the process. But I think, people will hear a little bit more about that today and
Yeah.
where that comes from. So welcome. And
Thank you.
you're welcome. What I always like to start with, oh my goodness, is can you share a little bit with us about how you got to what you're doing, what your story is?
Yes, absolutely. I think grief found me more than I found grief, but I think I started, I started as a clinical social worker, and I was always, or even just as a child, was always interested in how people find light through the dark places, like how we find lightness. I think all as healers, we all are interested in that question, and
Yeah.
so that led me to go to social work school. And then after I was got my master's, I went and worked in the Chicago public schools, and I just ended up with in situations working with kids who were in deep grief. Like they were in the middle, they lived in this violence, a world of violence. They had lost brothers
Mhm.
and sisters and parents, and they to violence, like
Yeah.
often gang violence. There was just a lot of trauma going on for these children. And what was so amazing about it to me was the fact that they had such an innate resilience, and more than that, this innate sense of how to find beauty even in the midst of that. So, for
Mm.
me, I that was my first, exposure to some of that. So for me, it might
Yeah.
have seemed shocking. For them, it was an everyday um, reality. However, they found beauty in life and joy. And I just thought, there is something to be learned there. There is something innately wise about grief. And if maybe as adults, we're getting in the way of it. Anyway, it led me into this whole field of grief. And then, as it should happen, a grief visited me in a personal way, and super unexpected way. Um,
Mhm.
my mother, who was like a very vibrant, full of life person, very unexpectedly one day walked out to the end of a dock on this beautiful Indian summer morning and took her life. And
Wow.
that was like, it was an unbelievably shocking experience for me. So
Yeah.
at the time, I was a grief counselor, and here I was like observing myself as a griever and knowing something about it, but really realizing on a personal level, walking through that was so interesting. Like I was interested in it professionally, but I was also broken by it as well.
Yeah.
And so I was really changed. And one of the things that happened to me in the midst of the shock of it, which was so fascinating, and I think shock is such a beautiful thing in its own way. I think grief actually we don't realize grief is a developmental passage that we all have to go through. I
Yeah.
mean, at some point, we just don't go through it during adolescence or in our 40s, or, we just go through it at a different time, each one of us. And each one of us are moved by grief as a developmental passage. I believe it's there to expand us. It's actually there to teach us something.
Mm,
And so if we open our eyes and look, it wants to teach us, and it
wow.
wants to expand some of the most beautiful human qualities. And we know this if we just think about it rationally, like it makes us more empathetic, right?
Yeah.
It can make us a lot more appreciative of life because, like, hey, this moment could be, what if it's our last conversation talking?
Yeah.
It's life is incredible, and
Yeah.
it brings that richness to it, to the surface of it. And so, when I was going through the shock of my mother's death, I felt awestruck in both terrible and beautiful ways. Like I saw everything just felt so beautiful. I was in shock, so the mind kind of shut down. So I wasn't
Hmm.
like overthinking anything. I wasn't ruminating. I was just experiencing. And I
Yeah.
experienced some of the most beautiful things in the middle of my pain. And I thought, there's something there too. There's something
Yeah.
there. So I just kind
Yeah.
of opened my eyes and watched, um and then ended up writing about it, and writing a book about it and sharing it, and it just informed the work of grief. But it it just helped me to feel like this is worth talking about, and this is worth, you know helping people with. It just felt more and more like this was the meaning, part of the meaning of that I found out of my mother's death, was this continued and more informed passion to help people find their natural birthright, which is joy, after the pain of something so devastating as the loss of a loved one.
Yeah. Wow. That's intense. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that. That's just so vulnerable
Yeah.
to share that with
Yeah.
everybody. And,
Yeah, well,
you know,
and I think one of the things that came out of that was my entire family was said, we need to talk about this because this came out of secrets, right? My mother was in a secret kind of pain that we didn't know about.
right.
And she didn't let us in. So there was no, and maybe we couldn't have helped. I mean, me, of course, as the therapist, not to be able to help my own, I just want to help if we're helpers, right? I just
Yeah.
wanted to help my own mother and I couldn't. And that was something that was a real pain point for me to
Yeah.
look at.
Yeah.
But I think just to talk about it and to realize, like, we all have those moments where we think life is going to break us, and often that happens when we experience a very deep loss.
Mm,
So
yeah. Yeah. Wow. And I worked with people who have had similar losses, and it's just amazing that you don't expect the experience. What happens is not what you expect when after somebody dies like that. The person who has the loss seems to grow in so many ways and find beauty and joy in so many different things. Like as the therapist, you wouldn't expect that. You just don't know what's going to come. People find parts of themselves that they didn't realize were in
isn't
there.
that so beautiful? Like, that's what
It
I think the
is.
beauty of it is. Like, to me, it's a sacred experience. It's something so beautiful about the way that it's a very noble teacher. you know
It really, it's like
I
has a
mean,
life of its
pain,
own.
pain is a noble teacher, and
Pain
grief is
is.
part of that pain. But,
Yeah.
but I think, it's like that. What is that quote by Khalil Gibran or something? It's like about sorrow. It's like the deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain.
Wow.
And so I do, just to speak to that aspect of the restoration of joy, we definitely feel like it's never coming back. I mean, in various losses, and in my life, I felt like, well, the joy part is over, and
Yeah.
I just want peace. I just want
Hmm.
equilibrium. I don't. Um, but the fact that joy can be returned to us, and it's more informed because of the sorrow. Like, it's a more intricate joy because we know so deeply its opposite. And
Mm.
so there's something really miraculous the day that you find yourself feeling lighthearted again after a
Oh,
loss,
yeah.
you know. And I
Wow.
think it's about trusting this process because grief is a part of the immune system. It's a part of the system of natural intelligence in the body, and it's got a process. And if we trust it, if we sort of just let it move through us, there's an innate wisdom there, and there's a way that it will move us towards that again,
Yeah,
which is really worth trusting.
Yeah. Can you tell us more about that process and trust in the process that people go through if they trust it? And my experience is that so many people don't, and they also get mixed advice, like stay really busy.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
know.
yeah.
Like,
Right. Well,
what do you
well, our
see?
instinct, of course, like it's so true. I mean, and I feel the same. I mean, we've all been there. I think we want to avoid pain at all costs. Like we don't
Yeah.
want to touch the hot stove. And in the beginning of grief, when it's an open wound, it's an open heart wound. It's basically like you just got a huge cut and you're walking around with an open wound, and you don't want to touch that. You want to protect that at all costs.
Yeah.
Like the way that grief works is that it helps bring new skin over the wound slowly, and it brings, and then that healing comes slowly if we let it. But it has its own pace, and it's not the pace that society would tell us. It's not the pace of our mind. Our mind wants to go quick and get through. And particularly I know this in my case, because in times when I've had grief, I've been like, well, I know what I'm supposed to go through, so then I shouldn't have to go through it, right? Because I know it.
Hmm.
But that's not how it
I could
works.
skip that part.
We all wish that we could skip the pain part of it. But the pain is this beautiful teacher. And I do think we get in the way of it mostly by trying to resist it. And the collective consciousness society doesn't want us to honor grief. I mean,
Right.
at one point they would call it, complicated grief if it lasted longer than 6 months. And that's just unrealistic because it deserves its own timetable. And it is the timetable of natural intelligence. So it's the timetable of nature. So it's the timetable of an acorn growing into an oak. It will take its own time, and it has its own rhythms and its own paces. And it's in getting to know those rhythms and those paces, how we work, as we get to know ourselves so much better when we do that, when we sort of pay attention to that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And would you say people, I'm asking because I've had different clients grieve in different ways. Would you say that who you are as a person sort of shapes how you grieve? And also,
100%. Yeah.
is it also tell us about that and about the relationship you have with that person and how that
Yes.
might inform your
Yes.
grieving?
Absolutely. Well, I think it depends. The relationship certainly shapes the grief, but grief basically shows us who we are alone. So if that person was an intimate partner, and I have this personal experience too of having lost my husband of 30 years, but
Oh,
if that person is an intimate partner where they really you grow as one, right, in a long-term union, right,
yeah.
or in an intimate union, you grow as one, then you really have to go through an entire identity shift. If it's a parent, it's the same thing, right? Because who are you as an adult? You're no longer someone's child who's living on this earth. There are huge identity shifts, but each person's individual we all come with different gifts, and we all come with different temperaments and different makeups. Like you said, when people say keep busy, for some people that is perfect, because some people are action people and they need to act through things. And some
Hmm.
people, like I call them doers and beers, right? Some people just want to be with it, right? I'm a total
Hmm.
beer. Or there's a doer who just says, I'm going to, this satisfies me. And so you really learn a lot. It's an opportunity to learn about yourself. It's really a hero's journey, because it's like you go into this foreign landscape, because each time it's a little bit different. Grieving your mother is different from grieving it's different from grieving a sibling. It's different from
Yeah.
grieving a child. These
Yeah.
things affect us. The loss affects us in very different ways. So we're placed in some kind of a foreign landscape, and we have some of the tools, or maybe none of the tools because we've never been through it, or maybe we have some familiarity, but it's a little bit different this time around. So we have to go into this foreign landscape, learn about the landscape, develop the resources to survive in this landscape, and eventually come back into the world, so to speak, because when we're grieving, we're kind of in parallel worlds. We're kind of in that watery world of grief and natural intelligence and
Mhm.
healing, and then we're also in the world of the mind, and sometimes that feels really incongruous, but eventually we want to return to life, right? We want to get it back into life, and we come back expanded. We come back with
Yeah.
tools.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you, in your experience, I mean, I don't know how it was for you, but like, what's your thought about people working and grieving at the same time?
Yeah, I think it's for some, look, it's a full-time job that you get thrust into that nobody wants. It's the job nobody asked for, nobody applied for, but was given to you. And it's a
Mhm.
24/7 job.
Mhm.
And so therefore, it's really helpful to have breaks from it.
Yeah.
Like breaks from being consumed with it. And
Yeah.
sometimes being at home for too long. I think for a certain period of time, yes, but sometimes you really do need to be in the world to remind yourself that you will again be in the world, that it's waiting for
Mhm.
you,
Mhm.
if in whatever small ways you're ready to come back to it.
Yeah.
And then it's a lot about self-protection and
Mhm.
self-care. And self-care and self-compassion is again not something that's stressed in our society or valued,
No, I
especially,
know.
so it's a formidable learning to to learn that for ourselves,
Yeah.
but it's an incredible gift. And as you said, like, you see people, I'm always amazed by people, how people, the strength and resilience in people moving through grief, and the ways in which they have such beautiful qualities of compassion, of empathy. This thing that I like to call, it's like a kind of a patience with like life's ups and downs, that I call like transcendent endurance. But I think it's maybe grace, basically. Like, I think it's grace. Like, you see people, or you say, and people, clients will always say, like, everybody calls me so courageous. And I'm like, well, there are a lot of choices in grief, how you move through it. And
Mhm.
also, courage is thrust upon you. It's not like you're not
Mhm.
afraid, but your courage is thrust. People are incredibly courageous who walk the path of
Mhm.
grief. you know
Yeah. Yeah.
they deserve a lot of respect. I feel like we should just be like honoring everybody who's going through that path, because there's so much, they're in an intense learning.
Have you seen a lot more grief or evidence of it since COVID?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, that actually, I think, was really humbling to look. I mean, it was astounding, I think, the way in which it forestalled people's grieving, because you know, again, this 24/7 job, and you need breaks, and you need to be able to, and connection is such an important part of, grieving, and we were deprived of personal connection, human touch, and the grieving rituals that would have taken place, that weren't able to take place for so many
Yeah.
people who lost loved ones.
Mhm.
And the reconnection, like when you're ready to move back into the world in new and different ways, couldn't do that because being in groups of people. And I mean, it really forestalled so much. It was,
Mhm.
so that the people who underwent grieving and have undergone grieving during these last few years, to me, are like true heroes. Like,
Wow.
it is unbelievable, the strength I see in these people. Like, it's so admirable. It's so
Wow.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. It kind of, it reminds me of like people develop emotionally, but if they start using like some kind of drug or something, then they stop developing. And when they
Yeah.
stop, that's when they start to develop more. And it sounds like that COVID stopped that whole process for
Well, it's
anybody
certainly,
yeah,
yeah. I mean, and
who
it
lost
certainly made
anyone.
everybody like, yeah, everybody had to, it was just some external way in which they said, no, you can't do any of these things now. Try to do it all by yourself alone, like, with no human. I mean, it's really, it was an unbelievable
It was
ask
just
and
nuts.
lesson that some people have had. Yeah.
I suppose, like you said, that pain is a great teacher. Maybe we were on some level supposed to learn something, but wow, that was a
Yes,
hard one
learn
for
even
anybody.
more. But
Yeah,
that
learn
was
even
that
more.
was a really tough agenda, like a really tough
Yeah,
curriculum, like a
yeah,
PhD level curriculum.
right.
That is, really
Yeah, yeah.
unbelievable.
So the elements of healing, of grief, like you just mentioned, like the idea of rituals, or can you tell us, like, what are some of the ways that common things that you think are necessary for people when they're grieving to help them get
Yeah.
through the process?
Yeah. I think a sense of um, mindfulness is helpful. Like an open mind is a really incredibly helpful thing. Yes, grieving rituals are extremely important. But I think of three super important tools that are useful and have broad applicability for grief.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one is self-compassion, because so much of it is about self-care, self-protection, taking your temperature all the time. Because, like, when you're in early grief, it's like you have the flu. Like, being in shock is like having the flu, because it takes up 70% of your emotional,
Oh,
physical, and mental energy to be in shock. Because it's just your whole system is about the wound, tending to the wound, right? So you're a little bit spacey, you're forgetting things,
yeah.
you've got the fog, you're tired. You basically, the rule of thumb is treat yourself like a sick child. So
Mm-hmm.
that means self-compassion. Take your temperature. What do you need? Do you need to be laying down? You're not going to have the same stamina that you had. I
Yeah.
remember I had one client who had lost a brother, and she was young in her 20s, and she said, I went back to school and I just thought I would be back at school and everything would be fine. And I had no idea why I couldn't focus in my classes. I had no idea why I just couldn't study. Like, I couldn't even do it. And that's the power of shock. So self-compassion is really critical. And so that's the first tool, and it's
Okay.
applicable like through everything. It's
Yeah.
just that
Mm-hmm.
compassion, that, like, remember the wound, like, tend to the wound. How does
Mm-hmm.
it need tending to? And
Yeah.
continuing to sort of take your grief temperature. Like, where am I at today? Today may be a day where the grief is not here, the grief is here, and I can connect and feel okay. But today may be I might have had a trigger, holidays being a big trigger for a
Yeah. I
lot of
wanted to
people.
ask you about
And
that.
now it's here. So I actually have to pretend be more like I have the flu now. I have to, pull back a little bit, because grief goes in these cycles. It's not linear. It's just sort of, it's very watery. So that self-compassion is critical. The second tool of grief is also perspective.
Oh, okay.
So, like, expanding your perspective outwards, because when you're in the sadness, you almost can see nothing else. Sometimes it feels like it's the only thing. But this
Mm.
is where the kind of beauty comes in, or the kind of juxtaposition of other things in life besides just the sadness, right? We can go through these hard things, but they don't actually have to like, they don't have to be everything. They aren't all of who we are. They are just a part of who we
Yeah.
are. So that
Yeah.
perspective, which is, includes that kind of gratitude and that kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
is also really important. Um, and the third thing is actually it's faith or trust. Faith or trust, it can be in something greater. It can be in a greater power, greater than yourself. But if you don't have that, if that's not your belief, if you don't have that belief in something bigger, you're really just having faith in grief as a restorative process, as a part of the immune system. So faith in the body, the way you would allow your broken leg to heal before you ran on it, you will allow this process to complete itself. And it wants to complete itself. As a
Mm-hmm.
part of the immune system, it wants to restore you to
Mm-hmm.
equilibrium. It is
Mm-hmm.
fighting to restore us to equilibrium. It wants us to experience, equilibrium, unity, joy, and whatever expanded sort of pieces of our character are going to happen. It wants that too.
Yeah.
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 So,
But
yeah.
those are great elements of healing. Wow. It just reminds me of, like, so when my father died, before he died, the relationship felt so much more alive than it did ever, really. It's so weird when that happens, but and it gave me that
Is
perspective.
that because you knew he was dying?
Oh yeah, he
Or
had
yes.
cancer.
Okay.
It
Okay.
was
So like you had,
terminal.
yes, I
Yeah,
understand.
no, it
Yeah.
was terminal
Hmm.
illness, and I knew,
Yeah.
it was happening right in front of
The
me, and
immediacy of death like brought that love
brought
or
that out,
connection. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
aliveness, and that gave me a
Yeah.
good understanding. And you said like how it expands who you are, right? Like of
Yeah.
the depth of relationships, whether you feel it or not,
Hmm.
that it's actually like, family bonds and stuff like that, how strong they are.
It is incredible too, how it's in part of coming back into life, right, after the intense period of a loss is so difficult because there's a lot of guilt. We all carry all this guilt. Like, how can I go on if the person can't go on? And I like in my own experience, I turned it. I turned it like I turned that into a saying of like I actually have to. Like for example, in the case of my husband who was like a maximizer of every moment. He like lived every moment and he um
Mhm.
and I was like, well, he's been deprived, so am I going to waste mine? Like that would not honor him. Like I actually
Uh,
have to honor him by living
yeah.
more, I have to get into life even more. Like I have to challenge myself to be even more connected, and try and be like him in that way.
Hmm.
Sometimes picking a couple of values that the person had that you really, really value, that you really valued can help you to honor them. Like
Yeah.
those can be a way that you reconnect by honoring them. But it's
Mhm.
amazing how lasting people's influence are in our lives. We also think if we move forward, we're moving further away from the time when they are alive. That is true. And that's a tension that is existent. But we think we're going to lose our connection to them. But it's like we're still here talking about your father and your closeness. Like it's incredible people's legacies when they are
Yeah.
loved and
Yeah.
how they touch us and
Yeah.
how it lasts and we think it's going to go. And that's the surprising thing about grief is that it actually gets stronger. I actually
Hmm.
feel more strongly, like I feel so strongly still about, for example, my husband or my mother. I remember the important things. Like I
Hmm.
remember the feelings,
Yeah.
of how I
Yeah.
felt or how, they made other people feel.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I wonder if they knew that. Like, did they know how long the people who are gone, did they know how long and how well they would be remembered and regarded and valued and the impact they would have? Like, I wish we would all know that.
I
Like, do
know.
we know that?
I think
Do we
that's a
know
good
that?
thing for us to all like just commit to our awareness right now that we have an impact on the
That
people that we're
goes
close
on
to.
for so long, right? So long people tell stories and we remember things and it's amazing
And
the
it becomes a
impact.
part of who we are.
Yeah.
And so that
Yeah.
person's legacy lives on and it just keeps getting passed on to the into the future. It's really so powerful.
And maybe that is something like we were talking about the holidays. Like maybe that is something. Like maybe the thing is we say I want people to be remembered on the holidays, right? The people we've lost, but I want everyone who's still here to know how much they mean.
Oh
What an
yeah,
impact they have on our lives.
right. How important they are.
Yeah. I mean, I also think the other super grounding thing during grief and also during the holidays is to have an overarching goal, like for your grief, like a place where you're headed. So, like in my own example, if I was, with my mother, I said, like, I will find some sense in this senseless event. It was a senseless
Oh,
thing. It
yeah.
was so senseless for somebody like to think that they weren't worthy of living
Oh
or to
yeah.
somehow get that to that
Yeah.
place where they would need to kill themselves. I mean, it was kill. She wanted to kill her pain, but whatever. It it was so senseless. And I said, I will find sense. I will find beauty in this terribly painful experience. I will find
Yeah.
the opposite.
Yeah.
That was my
Yeah.
goal. So that was one goal. But what the goal does, and for other people, it can be like, I will, you know, carry forward a particular legacy, or I will make people aware of the cause of death. Sometimes it could be, heart health or whatever. Um the goal grounds you during the watery moments, the sad moments, the
Hmm.
the times when you feel kind of lost. You say, but I'm headed here. I'm
Yeah.
actually headed here. This is where I'm
Yeah.
headed. So let's, even though
Mhm.
I'm walking through difficult waters right now, this is where I'm headed.
Mhm.
And that can help also, during the holidays. Like, how do I want to look back, 10 years from now and see myself having moved through this?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. And I
I
think
want to be there.
the idea of letting people know, especially during the holiday season, how important they are to you, and having that be a goal when you're grieving, right? So letting people who are there with you, bringing up the memory of the people who have lost. That's a good, that's a short-term goal.
Yeah, yeah, right. And it has the beautiful advantage of connecting us, like
Yeah.
the heart
Yeah.
connection, which then tends to
Yes.
the heart wound, which is grief. Yeah.
Right. Something you mentioned just a minute, it said a phrase brought to my thoughts to the idea of maybe this is a rabbit hole, I don't know, but how people die
Yeah.
and how we talk about it. And I always, more lately, have thought about, when somebody's got a mental illness, major depression, and they end up, it's dying by suicide, right? It's almost like it's not something they chose. It's not something they chose. It's the illness took
Certainly
over.
not a choice, right? Even like a disease is not a choice, right? If
Right.
somebody has addiction, it's not like we sometimes think they have a choice in their behavior.
Yeah.
It hijacks the body
It
in the same
hijacks the
way any
mind.
other disease hijacks the body and the mind. And
Yeah.
in the disease of mental illness that results in suicide, whatever the cause of that mental illness or whatever the specifics of that mental illness are, that is a disease that hijacks your thinking.
Yeah.
And so they're not thinking clearly, right? So it's not like it's not like someone was a murderer and set out to commit a crime.
Yeah.
And it's just a very un- tragic, distorted level of thinking that
It
happens. Yeah,
is.
but
It
it is
is.
interesting how we talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the idea that, and I've had clients who have had, well, not, just different kinds of deaths in families, and the family just doesn't talk about it. And it
Yeah.
could be like, 30 years later, and they still haven't really grieved it because they never fully processed, which
Yeah,
is
I think
a
part of
shame.
that, I think part of the process is learning how to talk about it. I mean, we
Yeah.
don't talk about it. We're none of us comfortable talking about death
Right.
or
Yeah.
dying because we don't want to cause anybody any pain. And our intent is very good, but we don't know how to talk about it. But part of going through the grieving process is that you actually have to help other people talk about it because they don't know and they approach you in a way that you have to help them. They're looking for clues from you about what do you want in your grieving. And for everybody, it's different. Some people want to talk about it. Some people are offended if you bring it up. So you have to learn as the griever to kind of show
Show
people
people
what
what
you
you
need,
need.
learn what your needs are, what are your
Yeah.
needs,
Yeah.
identify them, and then help people, um, let them know.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
the art of conversation in grief, which is something
Yeah.
amazing to learn.
Right. I mean, and you don't know, as somebody who, knows, when people who have passed away, it's always like a question, like, how do I bring this
Yeah.
up? What do I say to people?
Yeah. It's
It's
hard. And I always say to people, you won't know. You won't know. I still don't know sometimes what to say to people because I don't know what their preference is. But the one thing we do know is that we can listen. And we just have to meet the person where they are so we can listen to their cues. If they're showing us they don't want to talk about it, we respect them and don't talk about it. It's not about our needs to talk about it or express how we felt, or it's more about just giving love and giving a listening ear, I
hmm.
think.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you help people? What is it? How can you tell us a little bit more about your business, your practice, and how people could work with you?
Yeah, yeah. So I do, I've always done individual grief work
Uh-huh.
and that, helping people sort of one-on-one move through the intensive experience of grief. And then I do groups and I actually have a group, an online group starting. um, COVID made the online expanded our ability to get together at least, which I
Yeah.
think is lovely. So Yeah, so
Mhm.
I have an online group starting at around the holiday. It's just after Thanksgiving.
Mhm.
And that's like I'll do like a 6-week groups, which is like a blueprint for grief. So it's sort of like everything you need to know as you're, going to be moving through grief. And that covers all these things like the art of conversation and self-protection and moving through the holidays and how to deal with triggers and how to deal with the sadness and restoring, when you're ready to kind of get back into life, how to re-enter slowly, dipping your toe in the pond and those kinds of things.
Mm, mm.
So
That's
grew
nice.
and yeah. And then I have also like a course that is, you can just do your own sort of self-study course.
Yeah. And you have a
Yeah.
book.
And I have a book.
Okay.
Yes, The
So you
Wisdom
have
of Grief.
lots of
Yeah.
different ways that people could learn from you and get support. And really, that's great because
Yeah,
some
just
people want to just
educate.
start on their own and some people aren't
Yeah.
ready for the group.
Right. Right. We all have a
Yeah.
different pace and we all have a different need.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it doesn't matter whether you were grieving, from something that just happened or from something that happened, 18 years ago, right? Or that we just, is still kind
Yeah.
of there or didn't
Didn't get
move through yet.
processed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you think people should know or that you would want to tell people? I mean, maybe we've covered everything, but like just I don't know what your full expertise is. So if there's something,
Yeah.
that you would want
Yeah.
people to know that, you know, if they're
I
going
would
through a
want
grief,
people to
yeah.
know that everything you're going through is normal. You're not crazy, you're just sad. This is what heartbreak looks like. Heartbreak is
Mm,
messy and heartbreak can be overwhelming, and that I just would want people to know, like, you're not alone. Like, you are not alone. We are all going through this. This is a universal developmental passage that each person has to go through in a different way. But
yeah.
everyone has or will be walking through that, and there's something to be learned for through each of us. But I would
Mm,
also want to thank people for walking that formidable path for us and
yeah.
taking on that learning. But yeah,
Hmm.
and also just that it is the restoration of joy is the piece, the final healing piece of grief, that it is there.
It
It
is
is
there.
there.
We'll come back.
It is our birthright. It is there.
Mhm.
Yeah, it is our hard one, right?
I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
This is so interesting. And I know this is going to be so helpful for people just hearing you talk about this. And I think like you said, talking about it is so important and not holding it all inside. So I hope people reach out to you and do your programs and your online course, your groups, because I know it's going to be very helpful for them.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
thank you. I love talking with you about it. Thank you for the
Yeah.
opportunity.
No,
Yeah.
my pleasure. Thanks for coming. And um,
Yeah.
and people, I'll put all your information in the show notes. So anybody that wants to reach out to Leslie will have the links to be able to do that. And thanks for watching today. And we'll talk to you all next time. Okay, bye, Leslie.
Bye.